and get started. I think
Yes,
that we
we
should move
can.
forward. Because we are coming up on our time and I know people are going to join and they're going to join late. Because that's what happens. So why don't you get started and I'll do some tee up as well, and maybe there'll be more people on. Otherwise, we are live on Facebook and we are recording. So this recording will be available for folks. All right.
Greetings and good evening, everyone. My name is Nancy Victor Green, and I am the president of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated, Manhattan chapter. And on behalf of the board and members, I welcome you to our program this evening, Black Women's Survival Tactics for Uncertain Economic Times. The National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated is a 40-year-old national 501c3 nonprofit organization. Through advocacy and leadership development, we work as change agents to influence policy that promotes gender equity in health, education, economic empowerment, and public policy. We believe that through our efforts, we will fulfill our vision of seeing Black women and girls living in a world where socioeconomic inequity does not exist. I want to thank the New York Regional Chapter of the Health Services Executives for partnering with us. NACI is a nonprofit organization of Black healthcare executives founded in 1968 for the purpose of promoting the advancement and development of Black healthcare leaders and elevating the quality of healthcare services provided to minority and underserved communities. This evening, we will discuss Black women's survival tactics post the COVID-19 pandemic. We are facing uncertain economic times and must deal with the high cost of living, with inflation and financial instability. And at the same time, we're navigating the shifting industry trends in banking, healthcare, and technology, which have led to job insecurity and career disruptions. All of these things have put a strain on our mental health. We need to identify strategies and coping mechanisms to not just survive, but to thrive in these challenging times. This evening, you will learn about building and preserving wealth, entrepreneurship, investing, and retirement planning. You will hear about strategies to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the importance of representation of Black women in leadership roles. We will also explore our mental health and work-life balance. I'm looking forward to a lively discussion of these issues and more. One housekeeping item, all lines will be muted for the duration of the program. To ask a question, please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers. Chelsea Ransom Cooper, CFP, is Managing Director and Director of Financial Planning for Zenith Wealth Partners. Azare Montoute Lewis is Global Chief People Officer at Hill & Knowlton Strategies. And Michelle Owens, PhD, is a clinical psychologist, coach, and consultant in private practice in New York City, is an author and founding partner of Silent Agreements, LLC. Now, please welcome our first Vice President of Programs, Genera Gaston, who will moderate our discussion, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for your energy as well. And of course, thank you so much, Nancy, for your leadership and your help in putting this important program together. Again, I'm Genera Gaston. I'm the first Vice President of Programs for the Manhattan chapter. And I echo Nancy's energy that we are thrilled to have those of you who are able to make it on with us tonight. To make a big room smaller, and sometimes these calls can seem big, just humor me and just throw in the chat. And I don't need anybody to give me the trade secrets or whatever, but how is this tough economic times, how has it really impacted you? Maybe one or two ways that it's really been difficult, well, maybe challenging, not difficult, challenging for you. Just throw that in the chat as I move through these opening statements. As Nancy also mentioned, it's really important. This is an important discussion, and we'd like to try to empower those of you who are on the phone and equip you with some strategies for navigating the uncertainty that we're seeing now. we are particularly good at that. That is what the Manhattan chapter does. That's what National Coalition of 100 Black Women do. We bring people together as a community. We convene them, convene our people, our sisters, our community together to, to discuss the unique concerns and challenges faced by women of color, because we realize that there's an intersectionality of race and gender that adds to the complexity of what we're looking at. And so I was saying right before the call that, this morning it seemed as though maybe the trend in the inflation is now slowing, and that maybe, this summer we have something to look forward to, that maybe, gas won't be as expensive, but certainly I'm not getting on a plane right now because I simply do not have the money to do that. Because I'm still trying to buy eggs in the supermarket. But, that said, it is that rising cost of gas and food and housing that's caused a lot of anxiety for everyone, as Nancy said. And this disproportionately affects us and our communities in terms of our income, our wealth, our savings, our home ownership opportunities compared to our white counterparts. And then regarding us specifically as women, the high inflation impacts women because we're often so underrepresented, right, in high wage industries and overrepresented in industries that are not paid well. I know I see Chelsea is nodding her head, and I know that she's about to get on that point. And then on top, then the last thing is, for those of us who have children, the rising cost of healthcare, childcare is out of this world, and it really pulled so many of us out of the economy during the pandemic, and we're still trying to get back in. So inflation hinders women's financial health, our progress, and has long-term implications on our retirement savings and what we can do. And while we are an incredibly educated bunch, for sure, all these women here, we are smart, we have degree after degree, but we also have the student debt to go with it, and it sticks with us. And I can't say, right? I just have to say that, and often we can't get the degree, but we still have the debt. And that is really the problem, right? So I could go on and on. I will not, because that's not my job today. Today, we're fortunate to have three sister speakers who bring their distinct perspectives, as Nancy said, in the aspects of economic resilience, workplace dynamics, and mental well-being. And this session isn't just about the giving of the information. It's also, I'm hoping, having some conversations too with you all. So if you hear something that rings a bell or means something to you, then please, absolutely throw it in the chat. We can get a little church in here. It's all good. We're a cozy group today. So without further ado, let's dig in. What I have asked, and I'm sorry, I didn't tell our speakers up front who I was going to go to first, but I'm just going to look to I'm going left to right. I'm going clockwise here. So this is going to be to Azure first. But the question to all the speakers to kick us off is, in your perspective, in your area of expertise, how have you observed what have you observed about the specific challenges Black women face during this time? And what are the themes or patterns that you've seen, and how might women be overcoming? You can take as much time as you like. I mean, we're good. We have some time here. So I've got asked everybody to give opening remarks for about 7 minutes or so, but Azure, why don't I kick it off with you?
Yeah, no problem. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to this group today. I think being the Chief People Officer for my agency is really a part of my job to connect with employees and understand the things that are really top of their minds, and really, hopefully, through the organization's resources, whatever those may be, to help meet the needs for our employees, because ultimately they are the reason that we keep the lights on. And so when I think about what's been happening over just the last few months, the first thing, and I think particularly about Black women, is really about mental health and work-life balance. I think now that we have a culture that is definitely working on a hybrid schedule, I think it's much more difficult for us to set boundaries if that's not something, if that's another skill that we currently engage with. And so on my timeline, I was just surfing on LinkedIn just earlier today, and I can't tell you, I must have seen no less than 10 to 15 posts of fellow Black women in corporate America talking about being tired, being burnt out, being exhausted, really talking about self-care, taking a rest. It really is a movement, and it's something that's very top of mind, particularly, I think, for women of color. I think, now in this world, we're trying to integrate or better integrate work and home together. And so, as those of us try to continue to climb the ladder, continue to be successful and do well at work, like how are we taking care of ourselves? How are we making time for family? How are we enriching our lives with other activities outside of work, right? I had an epiphany. I just had a birthday recently, and I was thinking to myself, these last few months, all I've done is work. I haven't poured into myself in a truly meaningful way. And so mental health and work-life balance and really kind of integrating all of that, on top of that being compounded with just the volatility. I know we were talking about inflation before the meeting got started. Like, how does all of those things affect us? So that's one thing that's top of mind. Because of my former job, I used to run DE&I for my agency. And so I think there were a lot of benefits post the pandemic. I had many of my employees talk about how they felt more included. They were less exposed to microaggressions now that they were working in a hybrid manner. They didn't deal with the water cooler, talk that would make them feel excluded in the workplace. And they were finding just better support, being able to be working in a hybrid environment. And so I think now, if I think back to 3 years ago when I first stepped into that role, where so many organizations were putting up their black squares and talking about showing receipts on how they were committed to DE&I, as you can see, as with most things in life, the pendulum has shifted. And now the conversation is shifted a little bit. And so recently we saw, in particularly the tech sector and other sectors that experience significant layoffs, many people talked about how the DE&I leaders were the first to go. And considering where we've been a couple of years ago, it's surprising and shocking. But then for those of us who have spent many more moons than we care to think about in the DE&I space, it was almost something that we probably expected, but really hoped that we would really be able to sustain the focus on DE&I. So I think about how we're moving into this next phase, right, of where we are and driving a equitable and inclusive workplace, and how we have representation. I think gender and LGBTQIA plus bills that are being passed, and the conversations in some of our states around how we talk about history, how we talk about slavery, how we talk about racism. It's one of those things where you start to think about or think that we can't erase our history. We have to own it in order to move past it and go forward. But I think DE&I is something that I think about, and I wonder if we're going to be able to stem the tide of what we're seeing right now, in particularly in the US, but I think around the world, we're seeing some movements that feel a little backward looking than more so than forward looking. So I will say that's another thing that I think, particularly for Black women, and the intersectionality that Black women have. I think about that often. And then finally, I think now, and we'll talk about this, I think in further questions, Janera, that, I'm also thinking about resilience and really how we prepare for the new age. I've spent many meetings over the last 2 to 3 weeks talking about generative AI and how that's going to impact our business, right? How we're going to use ChatGPT, how we're going to engage in technology that's coming forward and ensure that we are prepared and at the forefront, right? And the first thing is actually understanding what's happening and really understanding how to use some of this new technology to our benefit. So I think about the young early career talent that we bring into organization that are much more aware. They've been using this, in college, they've been using this in their beginning jobs, and they're much more comfortable. But when I think about the 5 generations that are in the workplace now, how do we ensure that the people who are mid-level roles and senior roles, how am I preparing my leaders to really be able to adapt and be flexible and be supportive? And I think particularly for Black women, as we continue to watch as our representation is not where it should be, how do we prepare ourselves for a future that is very tech enabled, that is very focused on innovation and creativity, and really, particularly for people of color and diverse leaders, how do we really ensure that we can continue to stay ahead of the curve so that we always have a place wherever it is that we find ourselves. So those are really the top three things that are top of mind for me as I think about what's happening for Black women in the environment in which we work. And so there'll be other places I'll go, but I'm sure I've used my 7 minutes. So I'll stop there, but those are my top thoughts. So hopefully that's a helpful way to kick us off. So maybe I'll take the lead since I think Janera may be stuck in her internet.
Yeah, I
I'm
think she's
gonna
stuck in
throw it
Zoom limbo.
over to Chelsea, to you to answer that same question, my fellow panelists, to give your thoughts on kind of things that are on your mind right now, given your sphere.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sorry about that, ladies.
Sorry, it cut out. Did you say my name?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry. Good evening, everyone. I'm super excited to have this conversation. I wish we were having a conversation about certain times or more positivity, but it's okay. This is what life is about, right? And then there's going to be ups and downs. As Janera mentioned, I'm a certified financial planner, and I specialize in helping women and people of color make smart and impactful financial decisions. And when it comes to making those financial decisions, we also have to kind of take a step back and always start with where our mindset around money comes from. And I think all of us have to acknowledge that whether there were good things that we saw as we were growing up or bad things, those have impacted how we make decisions today and how we feel about our money. But I think first and foremost, as we're thinking about inflation is really high, student loans are coming back. How do we even know what we should be investing in and what strategies should we implement in the market? It's always going to come back to our goals, because if we don't have our goals and we don't have a plan in place, that's when we really also start to feel very overwhelmed, right? And it starts to feel like, how can we handle every aspect of our lives? How can I figure out what I should be doing in the workplace? How am I going to purchase that next home? What should I do with my kids if I don't have that plan in place, right? And I know there was a great quote that once said, a goal without a plan is just a wish, right? And we don't want to just have wishes. We want to actually make sure that we have a plan in place so that we can track it and make sure we reach that, which is what we do in every other phase of our life, right? At our jobs, they track us to make sure we're hitting all of our goals. We've got to take care of ourselves in that same way. I think it's also really important to acknowledge that since during the pandemic, everyone has been spending more. There was that first aspect where we were saving more than ever before, right? Because especially since we were in the house, working from home for the most part, the saving rate was the highest it's ever been. Now it has come down to the lowest it's ever been because people are spending more, but also inflation has had a huge impact. I think another aspect that we're not talking about though is, and Azari touched on it really well, is that burnout. And I see it a lot with my clients where it's like, I'm unhappy at work. I feel burnt out. I don't feel appreciated. But you know what feels good? I'm going to go buy that bag. That bag's going to make me feel good. And I know it's a short-term satisfaction because it's not actually helping my long-term goals. But for those 30 seconds that I open that package and I see that bag, I feel like, you know what, maybe everything doesn't suck. Maybe, you know, I can just enjoy myself a little bit, you know, and then we continuously chase that feeling. So it's really important for us to understand like the why and how we're choosing our goals when it comes to our finances. What are we working towards? Are we working towards setting our family up for a financial future and for success? And I think something really important that I always talk to my clients about is we're not going to put a number on it, right? We're going to talk about like, what is that feeling? Like, what is that setup that you have? Is it paying for your kids' undergraduate and any master's programs, right? Like, is that what success is to you? Or is it knowing that, you know, you can retire and you don't have a mortgage anymore? You know, what are those milestones that we can reach? Because I can help you get there. But, you know, if we're just talking about, oh, I want to have $1 million, like that's an arbitrary number, right? And with inflation, that number is going to change every time. So really figuring out and defining, you know, what are your values and what are your goals? But also in these uncertain times, we have to acknowledge, got to have a safety net. We have to make sure our emergency savings is taken care of. And there's some really great emergency savings vehicles that are offering pretty high interest rates. Janera mentioned inflation came down to about 4%, which is nice, but there's still some savings accounts like Marcus by Goldman Sachs, Ally, offering 4.15% just for having your savings there. Then, of course, you can put your money in some CDs as well. I always say don't put your emergency savings, but if you have some excess cash, outside of what you would need in a worst case scenario if you were laid off, since there's a lot of uncertainty as well, putting that in a CD where it is accruing interest can be very, very helpful. So being intentional about where your money is going. I think also when we're talking about investing, and especially with Black women, we're typically very risk averse, where we feel like, oh, I need to complete X, Y, and Z before I can put my money in the market because, I might lose it and I'm not certain on how it will perform. But it's important to understand what is your comfort level of risk. And then also we have to acknowledge like some of the companies that are available to invest in have been around for decades. We could talk about Disney, Coca-Cola, all these companies that we've grown up with, that we've known for years, or, if the overall stock market, you will get exposure in the overall stock market. I'm not big on picking individual stocks, but, I think we can all safely bet on the US stock market, because if that goes down, there will be fires in the streets and we'll have way bigger issues than, trying to get our money out of whatever S&P 500 or whatever ETF or fund we've selected. So making sure that we do have exposure to the growth of this country, because we are putting in work to support the growth of this country. We know Black women are the backbone of this country. So we want to make sure that we're able to invest and we're also getting the returns that everyone else is getting, right? So I think that's really important too. And lastly, I would say money is emotional. So we know sometimes also when the stock market is going up and down, the media loves to tell you this is down 20, 30%. They love the fear aspect of it. So trying to avoid the emotional financial decisions and always bringing it home to like, what do I need? What does my family need? We need our savings. We need to knock out our high interest debt, especially credit cards. And if you have student loans and they're coming back at the end of August, make sure you have a plan in place for those too. So what is that number going to be? And how do I make sure that I can build that number into my budget today so that when August or September comes and that number is coming back, I'm not upset with myself and I'm not confused on how I'm supposed to build now this $300 to $600 monthly bill into my spending. You've got to build it in now so you can make the adjustments in your habits today. So I'd say really the gist of it is defining your plan, setting your habits, and protecting yourself, making sure you have that savings, you're getting some interest, but you know what your comfort level of risk is so you can invest for your future.
All right. Thank you, Court. Thank you, Court. Sorry. Thank you, Chelsea. Sorry about that. Thank you, Chelsea. Michelle, how about you? What are your thoughts? Can you unmute? No? Oh boy.
Okay, I'm trying. Wasn't working. Sorry. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Been great listening to my fellow panelists, get your points of view, and a lot of what you're saying really represent things that have shown up in my clinical work with Black women, which my clinical work is primarily with Black women and their families, and to some degree their children, their adolescent children. So in thinking about this, I think a couple of things have come to mind for me just in terms of patterns. With the pandemic, I think one of the things that it showed all of us is that we are not in control. As much as we may think we are, as much as we try to be, as much as we try to control, if we didn't learn anything else, we learned that we're not in control. And I think in particular for Black women, this has been a challenge because so much of what exists in our families and in our communities and be in our workplaces relies on our ability to kind of manage things and keep things going and kind of just be leaders in that way. And so I think for many of us, we've done what we always do. We kind of adapt, we pivot, we bounce back. Where I think the issue has been in terms of mental health is that we often do that without giving weight to what's going on with us internally at another level. And I think it was mentioned earlier that folks are paying more attention to that now than perhaps they ever have. I mean, it's out there in the universe that these things are really important, self-care, taking care of your mental health, noticing when you're having mental health issues, all of that is really important. So I'm happy to see that that seems to be very much something that we are finally kind of warming to as something positive. But still within our community and with Black women in particular, we don't often reach out for the help that we need. We don't, and when we do, we often reach out at a point when we are at our breaking point. And so that's something that I still continue to see. It's getting better. I do see that more of us are thinking of, seeking professional help as something that's important and not so stigmatized. But I do think we still sometimes hold back a little bit between, the demands of life, bringing where you don't tell your business, where you're like strong and you can get through it, where no one else can tell you what to do, which by the way is not what therapists do. They don't tell you what to do, or they shouldn't. Some of that still remains. And so what I've seen, and in a couple of ways is, can you hear me? Because it's saying my thing is unstable. Can you hear me? Okay. What I've seen in a couple of ways is I've seen, like, if I divide it down the middle, there are those of us who have been more challenged in terms of our mental health by this sudden kind of wave of kind of pandemic uncertainty, whether it's financial, whether it's in our relationships, whether it's in dealing with our children. There have been those of us who maybe have not been taking care of our mental health as much as we should have all along. And then when this came along, it kind of destabilized those particular people further. And in particular, and challenge that notion of, I'm the strong Black woman, I can do it all, and I can handle it, shoulder it, and keep moving. I think there's a segment among us who were more severely hit by that, and therefore needed and continue to need more mental health support and involvement. Then what I've seen, which is encouraging, is that I've seen a number of Black women who use this opportunity to reset. And by that, I mean, took the time to really look inward a little bit more at how they have been living and what their life looks like and what brings them joy and what brings them frustration. And to begin to calibrate that all in terms of, what do I want my life to look like? I often say to my patients, what do you want your life to feel like? Because most people can paint a picture of what they want it to look like. I want a house there, I want these cars, I want my kids to do this. Most people can paint that picture, but what do you want it to feel like? And I think that's something that we need to learn to do more of, is to name our feelings, is to really name them. We have a few that we can name pretty easily. Most people can. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm sad. But there are nuances to all of that. And so I think one of the things that I have seen is that more and more of us are trying to reset, like, where am I in my life? What exactly is going on with me? What do I feel about these hierarchies that have been established based on race and gender and, age and class? And in that process, I've seen more women kind of step out a little bit more boldly and do things that they maybe had been thinking about doing, or maybe had never thought about doing, and decided to try those things. And I think as a community, we need to support that, because I think it's really important for Black women. As Black women flourish, the community flourishes. But at the same time, there's a balance between the efforts that we make on behalf of, growth, and also making sure that we do it in a way that balances with our ability to kind of cope, take care of ourselves, be kind to ourselves, give grace to ourselves, all of those things. And there's like a plethora of information now. It just exploded on the internet. I mean, I have more people come in and tell me they diagnose themselves, or they tell me what's wrong with them or what they need to do. Because I think people are becoming more literate when it comes to mental health issues. But at the same time, I think it's important to recognize when you might need a professional opinion. You know, I heard the word burnout a couple of times. I think burnout is real for sure, but I also think burnout is also a catch-all word for other things that could use some intervention, like depression, like anxiety. You know, we have a lot of high functioning people who are anxious as all get out, but it comes up in ways where they're more driven and they got to keep their schedules and they got to make sure everything is, you know, right or wrong, left or right, like it's, you know, in order. They're still internally struggling with the anxiety, but it comes out as achievement. And I think we need to sometimes take a step back and ask for professional information. It doesn't always mean that you're in, you know, on somebody's couch, but it certainly can mean, you know, there's access to all kinds of information online. You can have consultations with people where you just kind of see them once just to get a feel for like, oh, am I on the right track here? Or do I need to do something different? I think those things are important for sure, especially when it comes to anxiety. Depression for sure. I think a lot of people can have a little more ability to tell when they're depressed. I think, I mean, although I will say burnout also can be a catch-all word for depression. But I think anxiety sometimes kind of slips past us as, oh, I just have a lot to do, you know, and I'm just real busy and I'm stressed out and I need to sleep. All of which may be true, but sometimes you could use some help in figuring out some other kind of coping skills. So I've seen those two strains of people who have been really kind of knocked down a little bit more and have needed more mental health support, as well as, you know, Black women who have used this time to look inward and reset and grow and make some changes and, you know, resist some stereotypes, which I think is very important and growth giving and supportive to your mental health. And those are some of the patterns that I've seen. In terms of coping, I hear from a lot of people things that they've started to do. And I think it's really important to dedicate time. We talk about how we don't have any time. You don't have time not to take care of yourself. You really don't. So to dedicate time, whatever it is, if you have a meditation practice, great. If you don't have time for a full practice, you can meditate for 5 minutes in the morning. You can listen to music. You can turn to the things that traditionally have supported the community. And I think those are really, really important. You know, if you're a person of faith or spirituality, tap into that. I also advocate talk to older people. And I advocate that because they have the perspective of experience and time that can help you to kind of keep that perspective when things look like everything is going to like hell in a handbasket kind of thing, which a lot of people feel that way these days. But that's a tradition in our community, is that elders are around for wisdom and help. So I think those are some of the things that I think of and that I, you know, advocate for with the Black women that I work with. Go outside, get some sunlight on your face. I think when we couldn't do that, we were all going stir crazy, but there is definitely a benefit to going outside, walking in nature, even if it's like, you know, the local park or, you know, tree on the corner, to really kind of get outside and reconnect in that way. And there are many other coping skills that we can talk about as we go on, but I just think it's really important for us to think about, once you do that self-introspection, what do you want your life to feel like? And then become really intentional about how you set that up financially and in every other way.
I love that. I love it. Michelle, you've hit on so many different lessons I've personally learned throughout this pandemic. The whole idea of giving oneself space and grace, but also to give space and grace to others as well, right? I mean, to be able to give that and forgive others and do all that, it's just something I've completely embraced. And there was another comment that you made, but I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts that they have about what Michelle said. What I find very interesting is, you know, I've heard other Black women especially talk about having this soft life. So it was once everybody wanted to be I see people laughing. It's like everybody wanted to be a superwoman at one time. When I was coming up, and when I graduated from Syracuse, right? Chelsea went to Syracuse. When I came out of Syracuse School of Management, and it was just School of Management, there was no brand on it. You know, it was, you know, what consulting firm do you want to work for and where do you want to go? And boom, boom. And you just had, and, you know, how do you get those consulting companies? How do you get that interview? And how do you prepare for that interview? And how do you chop, chop, chop? And now it seems like, especially since the pandemic, it's like I hear Black women I've never heard, I just want to have a soft life, a soft life. I was like, oh, a soft life. I mean, where you can go out, smell the roses. You just want to live. You just look, it was so new and so it was a little scary, and I said, oh, that's that millennial Gen Z thing. I was like, there's nobody else that we're gonna think about that. But you know, I've realized it's actually taken off. It's really taken off now, particularly because of everything we've been through. That people just need to step back and take and give themselves some grace. I don't want to just, kind of go on and on and on. But did anybody else want to comment, or does anybody have any questions before I kind of launch in? Chelsea or Zuri? Anybody else on the call?
I thought that was a great point though about like the soft life. And Michelle, I think it speaks volumes when you were talking about burnout and how we do use it as a catch-all for like what we're actually trying to say, which is, anxiety, depression, like fear, doubt, all of those feelings that do actually have names as well. But I feel like that's where that soft life aspect came in, where it was like, I'm tired of this. Like, I want to, come home, relax, get to read a book, do something that's just for me, like have hobbies.
Right.
And, back to, it's not just about work all the time, like just doing things that make me feel good just because I like to. Like, how do we get back to that point?
And go ahead. Sorry.
No,
Zuri.
no, I was just gonna say, I think it's interesting because I think even the concept of the soft life, I think it goes back to a stereotype, particularly about Black women, that we are strong, that we are resilient, that we don't need anything. And I think that we are swinging the pendulum the other way and say, yes, I may be all of those things, but I also need downtime. I also need to take care of myself. I also need to have passive hobbies and activities. And so I just think it's kind of a bit of a transition in what I'm seeing and us trying to change the narrative around Black women and who we are and what we're capable of. We're not saying we can't do all the things, and we can't say that they don't put us in places to, be Captain Save them and be the fixers, right? Because I think about that every day. But I think we're also saying now much more clearly, with unabashedly, I think that we also need that downtime. We also want to be pampered and taken care of. We want to take nice vacations. We want to relax. We want to focus on ourselves. And I think that's a really important point. And I think that shift is a good one.
So let me ask this of you, Zuri, because I did read an article today and, talking about, it's the social contracts that we've been used to with work, right? And I think you kind of alluded to when you were in your remarks, and it was just, so after the pandemic, and then, people said, hey, listen, I don't want to, why would I go back to work? I don't want to go to work. And so this sort of became, the employees seem to have a lot of the power, and right, particularly in certain kinds of fields, personally white collar workers. And now it seems as though that shifted because of the economy and how inflation and people are, the job, it little changed a little bit. It feels like it's swinging back to where bosses are saying, well, we want you now to come into work, and we want you. So, and you also mentioned, when we're able to stay at home, fewer microaggressions. We don't have those issues. But now coming back, I mean, what's our motivation? Shouldn't we be worried? What are the new rules for us now as we think about, how we manage and move through the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question. I think, when I think about it, I think some of the challenges that particularly Black women face is that we're held to double standards, right? And that's really what I was alluding to, right? In many professional workplaces, we have to cope with the stereotypes of being the angry Black woman, or we are asked to do what I would call office mothering, right? In very meaningful ways, right? Because we are viewed as very maternal, right? Or we're seen as the enforcers, the people that can deliver the hard messages, right? If you think about all these stereotypes, these are things that we are being asked to do more often than not. And frequently, while this work is deemed as valuable and important, we tend to be overworked and underpaid, right? So when you think about the the rationale for why we need to go back to the workforce. That's why you've seen more recently, you've seen a very strong uptick in, particularly in Black women starting their own businesses and being their own bosses, because they say, you know what, if I can work for myself, I can work just as hard just for myself and what I need to do to carry forward in this new environment. I always laugh because I think about my son, who is only 8 now. There are going to be jobs available to him that were never even options for me. All those many years ago when I was thinking about tracks that I potentially would follow. And I think, you know, what I really think about is now in the go forward in the post-pandemic, as we're thinking about, you know, just new opportunities and what we want to do. I tell my mentees this all the time. I said, really think about, take a step back now, think about what it is that you actually want. What kind of environment in which you are going to thrive, right? We have changed, the world has changed, and now we need to really reevaluate around what we need. I think what I think about just over the last, I would say 2 to 3 years, I think one of the things that has served me well is my relationships. I remember there was a phase that we were talking about no new friends, right? And we were talking about, you know, only rocking with our day ones, right? But now I think that there is a post-pandemic move where now people are strategically forming relationships. They're joining organizations like ours and others to really find connections with other Black women. And I think it's really about coalition building, right? So when you think about how you move through the world, the opportunities that you have, the things that you know, the things that you're aware of, you need to have people around you to share and really uplift you in that. And really, we have to invest in those relationships, right? So I think that is another thing. And then, you know, I talk to a lot of women that have left the workforce for a variety of reasons, if I'm honest. And now they're starting to think about, okay, so maybe I want to come back, but I want to come back on my terms. And what does that look like? And I always encourage them to think about, you know, what are you doing in the meantime? I remember many, many years ago, probably in my 20s, when I think I don't need the book. I didn't need the book then as I need it now, right? I need to pick it up and dust it off. It was a Iyanla Vanzant book in the meantime. And I remember thinking about, how do I spend this downtime? When I take a step back and when I do my moments of self-care and I do these things, like, what am I doing to prepare myself in the meantime? And what am I doing to enrich myself in a meaningful way? So I think when you think about the overall of how we're navigating this time, I think about purpose. Like, I think so many of us are now grounded in the idea of really focusing on our purpose and reevaluating how we spend our time. And I think once we do that reflection, I think it'll serve us well and help us figure out the best way forward.
I think that's excellent. And I think, you know, it's the resonant theme here is be intentional. Be intentional with your money and your resources. Be intentional with who you're going to dedicate your time and your resources, particularly in the workplace. But then Michelle's talking about, you know, be intentional with how do you want your life to look? I mean, I guess we start there, right? And everything kind of comes, you know, kind of gets there. We start with that. And what you want your life to look like? And no matter what your age at this point, that's where we all are at, where we're saying, well, gee, what is it that I really want? What's gonna be fulfilling? And that's not where we were trained to start, right? I think that's what we're saying too, is that with my mother, it was like, well, no, Janera, you cannot be a liberal arts major because that's not going to feed you. You can't do that. No liberal arts for you. No, you want to be an African-American studies major? No. Then what, you're going to go to law school? Oh, you're not going to law school? No. Oh, you have to just, you know, it was, what is going to feed you? Not even people, how are you going to live? How are you going to make money and live? And to your point, Azure, you know, that's what I'm trying to talk with my kids about right now. It is, and that's how they talk in school. It's like, so how are you feeling? And how do you describe that? And how do you call that, you know, feeling? And it's all about, you know, what are your goals? Being goal oriented and being able to really write your narrative of your life and you know, before middle school. It's just interesting. And it's a great thing, for sure. It's a great thing. But I feel like that's really what we're saying. Chelsea, I wanted to ask you, you had some great comments about, where one might, some products maybe we might want to use in terms of saving. But I caught your quote, I think in the Wall Street Journal, about how much money you need to carry in your wallet on a daily basis. And I would love for you to share that, just a little bit about the article and what you were saying.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the article specifically talked about like how much cash do people tend to carry nowadays. And it was really interesting to see that, in the past, people would carry 50 to 100, if not even 200 or $300 in cash, where now the average person is carrying under $50 in cash, closer to about $30. And I'm curious, even if you think about it right now, like if you look in your wallet, like, does anybody have more than $50 just readily available on them? No, I was gonna say, okay, Azare. But I think it goes back to also because of technology and because of where we are, where a lot of people are leaning on, credit cards, debit cards, you can access things very quickly. You can go to the ATM if you do need to get cash, where it's not the need to carry that amount of cash. Malika never has cash. Malika, I'm in the same boat as you as well. But I think that also goes to how we're shifting and how we're approaching money. And we're thinking about it, number one, very transactionally to fulfill our needs. But we want to make sure that we're keeping it in a safe place where it can grow and accrue, like those emergency savings that I talked about, but also being invested as well. I did want to ask, when it comes to investing, does anybody invest outside of their retirement accounts right now?
Yes.
I see some yes, some no. Okay, we got another yes in the chat too.
Yes.
We know that especially, it's been really interesting to see that Black women, number one, we know are the highest growing group of business owners, but also on top of that, are the most interested in getting invested. The challenge though that we're seeing in the industry is that a lot of people of color, unfortunately, lean to like the first tip they see, which may not be the best tip. And then sometimes you kind of have to like walk a lot of that back or unpack it, but it also can build negative energy and negative trust in financial services or investing in general, where I'll work with people and they're like, oh, I tried to buy a stock that a friend of mine told me and it didn't work. And it's like, so now we have to kind of like walk that back, where it was like, all right, that really wasn't the person you really should have had a conversation with. They weren't a professional. So how do you then build that trust in your own knowledge and education about finances? Because if you're not confident, you're also not going to be quick to make decisions when it comes to your finances as well. So I think it's really important to, even if you're talking to friends or family members or reading books, just build that confidence. So then you can feel more comfortable making those decisions as well.
Fantastic. You have thoughts about that? Michelle, I wanted to come back to you just to, again, to just talk about that, just self-care. And actually it's a question for everyone. And if anybody would like to share, I'd love to know, just in terms of best, self-care, best practices. We talked a little bit about, right? We talked a little bit about going, if you have a spiritual practice, of course, if you got your exercise, anything, Michelle, that you've seen that's kind of new and interesting and or something maybe that you do when you talk about
What
self-care.
I do, because I think I preach better than I do, but I'm working on it.
Indeed.
I'm definitely working on it. I think, first of all, the first thing I'll say is make sure the foundational pieces are in place. Like you're getting sleep, you're eating well, and you're exercising. Because we could talk about meditating and all this other stuff, but if you're not getting sleep, you're not eating well, you're not exercising, you're kind of working against yourself, especially when you're challenged in an intense way. I do hear and talk a lot to the people that I serve around meditative kinds of practices. It's not always meditation. Sometimes it's just having a dedicated time, like I mentioned, music, like, we grow up in a tradition of music, all kinds of music, but there's a difference between kind of listening to music while you're like mopping the floor and all of that, which is fine. I think that's helpful. And just kind of sitting down and dedicating a time where that's what you're doing. I'm just kind of listening to music, and where you're really being mindful with what you're hearing and what that experience feels like to you. I think it really, there's research around this, that it really does help regulate emotions. It helps with depression and anxiety. Those kinds of things, I think, when we talk about intentionality, and that's why I said dedicate a time and a space too. I think a lot of people are talking about creating spaces that make them feel like, they can be calm, they can be relaxed, they can kind of let some of the day's thoughts kind of go and just kind of be with themselves. So, if there's something, it doesn't have to be anything big. You don't have to redecorate your house, but sometimes you can just have a corner where it just has the things that you love, things that you like to look at that make you feel good about yourself. And I certainly encourage that. And a lot of people that I talk to are kind of turning on to that notion that I have to make sure that the environment reflects how I want to feel on a regular basis. There are lots of mindfulness kinds of approaches, and I think mindfulness is really helpful, especially for Black women, because we, again, are tasked so much with taking care of so much for so many others, as was mentioned. But a lot of times what it does is it kind of keeps us in a spiral of, looking forward, what's next, worrying about what's coming, that kind of thing. And someone read a quote to me a long time ago, I never forgot it. They said, worry is an attempt at remote control. And that's really what it is. You're trying to worry ourselves into controlling something that hasn't happened, may not ever happen, or if it happens, we'll have to deal with it anyway. And so I think for us, being present on purpose, learning how to do that is so very important and so very calming. And a very simple approach that I encourage people to do is just do the 5 senses check. And some of you may know that, where you just kind of go through your 5 senses. You could say it out loud, or you could just say it in your head. You're taking a walk, you're going to work, you're getting off the subway, whatever it is. Check around for 5 things that you see. Then go to 4 things that you hear. Then go to 3 things that you feel, like tactilely, like what are you feeling? 2 that you smell, 1 that you taste. If you do that, and you could do it anywhere. You could do it at work, you could do it at home, you could do it in between things. If you do those kind of mindfulness exercises, it really brings you into the moment you're in, which is really the only moment any of us really has, is the moment we're in. And it kind of clears your head for whatever it is that is coming next. So I really advocate mindfulness activity. And there are a lot of them. You can find them online. Some of you probably do them, know them. But I think for Black women, it's particularly important because we are so geared towards what do I have to take care of next. And I think it really, really, really helps to kind of just practice that a little bit more.
That's so interesting because I think, it's true. And even when you say, well, I'm going to schedule that in, that's where you go wrong. It's almost like you go wrong as soon as you say that. It's like, well, in order for me to do this, the mindfulness, I got to schedule that in my phone. And then, it's just, and it becomes, and I think that's just been, just sharing my own personal issues with it. This is, I schedule it in, and then it's like, well, okay, well, what comes after that? What comes after? So I'm thinking during, the exercise or the, whatever it is, what's the next thing I have to do? And I think that's the point. Michelle's saying, right, when you're in it and you've scheduled the time, really be in it.
But even it's counterintuitive to say, I'll schedule it. Like, why not be mindful now? You're thinking about it. Just do it now.
Impossible.
Yeah.
No, it's great. No, but I think that's it's brilliant in its simplicity, which is what you're saying. It's like when you do it, like that's what it is, that's what it takes. And that's what's special for us, is to really get in it and to be present with yourself in those times. And it doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and it's not expensive to do, right?
No,
So
anyone can do it.
all right. And Azure and Chelsea, you want to share anything that that's helpful to you as we close this out? In terms of mindful, I'm sorry, in terms of managing these times. Let's say that. How about managing these times? Anything that works for you?
I mean, the truth of the matter is, I feel like Michelle in that I tell better than I do, right? You know what it is? The biggest thing that I've done for myself is I put boundaries around my schedule. I've carved out times where I have considered myself unavailable, that I can wind up my week or start my week soft, right? And so I think the biggest thing that I've done, because I think I've left to my own devices, I will continue to take every meeting I'm asked to do. I will continue to show up for others. I'll always say yes, right? Especially for people that I feel a responsibility towards, right? And so I think, yeah, I think we are, Chelsea. We are very similar. I just think that's one of the biggest things I've done. But I think honestly, I think just I take time. I always make sure to carve out time on my calendar just to do the things that I know bring me joy. And that could be just getting a manicure, pedicure. That could be spending time with my son. Like my son would ask me, Mommy, can we cuddle the morning before I go to school? And so I'll get up an extra hour and a half early because he has a much earlier start than I do and do that. But that sets my day off in the right way. And I think you just have to know what makes you tick and what is going to have the biggest impact for you. And just make sure, to Michelle's point, make sure you carve out the space, be mindful, take the time, and do. And that's the only thing that I've honestly put into practice. I think there's more that should be done. Oh, actually, I do have one more. My husband, God bless him. I've been talking about for years, I wanted to take piano lessons. I'm sorry, violin lessons. For my birthday, he hired a violinist to come in and give me an hour and a half lesson. So now I have my violin that I occasionally pick up and take my bow. And there's something about the violin that just speaks to me, right? But now it's about carving out the space, being mindful, to Michelle's point, to find the time, even if it's just 15, 30 minutes for me to sit there and just hear the notes and hear the music, because I know music speaks to me. So anyway, I think you just have to know yourself and know what makes you tick and what's going to actually affect your mood in a positive way, and just do more things like that, and really prioritize those things.
Love it. And Chelsea, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just say, I think knowing what really can bring you joy and that peace as well is so important. So for me, it's meditation. It was something I actually just got around to recently. At first, I was like, I don't understand it. You just sit and breathe. But over time, I realized that it is truly like the tranquility and the peace and the reset that I need, especially, long days, some long meetings. And it's like, I just need to reset and like ground myself. It's been really, really helpful for me to do.
Fantastic. All right, ladies, I know we're past our time. Thank you so much for sticking in there with me. I think that the conversation for tonight is absolutely, Black women, we need to be mindful. We need to be intentional. We need to embrace the idea of a soft life. We'll get there. We will get there soon. But probably what's most important is absolutely to think about what it is, what's going to bring you joy, right? And how to get there. And what's brought me joy is just being able to have all of you on this call tonight. And I just can't say thank you enough to all of you ladies for sticking in there with us. Chelsea, Azure, Michelle, it was outstanding. I wish I could have done this another whole hour, but then we need alcohol and stuff. So it's just all right, everybody. All right. Thank you so much again. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.